Every year, my neighborhood goes all out for Halloween. Yards are transformed into graveyards, porches become lairs for witches, and every home competes to see who can create the most spine-chilling atmosphere. But 2 years ago, Halloween was less about pretend scares and more about a genuine fright I'll never forget. That year, I decided to host a Halloween gathering for close friends. We were all in our late 20s, far from our trick-or-treating days. But Halloween remained a beloved occasion. My home was adorned with the typical decorations: carved pumpkins, cobwebs, and a faux cauldron bubbling over with dry ice. As the evening darkened, the first of my friends arrived. Our laughter and the sound of clinking glasses filled the house. We traded stories of our most memorable Halloweens, and as we reminisced, I couldn't help but glance out the window every now and then, admiring the parade of costumes passing by. Hours flew, and as it grew late, fewer trick-or-treaters roamed the streets. But just past midnight, my attention was caught by a solitary figure. A tall man in a long black cloak was standing at the corner. He wore a pale mask, eerily realistic, depicting a face that was twisted between pain and rage. This mysterious man wasn't moving. He just stood there, and what was most unsettling was that he seemed to be staring directly at my house. My initial admiration for the detail of his costume slowly turned to unease. "Hey guys," I whispered to a couple of friends, pointing discreetly toward the window. "What do you think of that?" They squinted into the darkness, and a quiet tension settled over the group. "He's probably just admiring your decorations," one friend suggested, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. Wanting to break the tension, another friend joked, "Or maybe he's admiring you." We all laughed it off, but as the night continued, my glances towards the window grew more frequent. The man remained rooted to the spot, his unwavering gaze fixed on my home. After what felt like hours, the party came to an end. My friends left in pairs or groups, casting wary looks at the man who, by this point, had become the stuff of our uneasy jokes. But once alone, the gravity of the situation truly hit me. I locked all the doors, double-checked all windows, and decided to head to bed. Perhaps, I reasoned, he was just someone taking the Halloween spirit too seriously. But as I readied myself for bed, I heard a sound that made my heart leap into my throat. A slow, deliberate scratching, like metal against wood, coming from my front door. With trepidation, I approached my front window, peeking out just enough to see without being seen. The man was no longer on the corner. He was now on my porch, running what looked like a knife over my door, all the while wearing that haunting mask. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I explained the situation in a hushed, hurried tone. The dispatcher assured me that an officer would be dispatched immediately and advised me to remain on the line. Every minute that followed felt like an eternity. The man continued his ominous scratching, never attempting to break in, just marking my door. Finally, I saw the blue and red lights of a patrol car approaching. The man must have seen them too, because he suddenly halted his actions, leaving behind a door marred with long, deep scratches. By the time the officer reached my porch, the masked man was gone, disappeared into the night. The officer took my statement, looked over the damage, and promised to increase patrols in the area. But there were no leads, no explanations, just a series of haunting questions with no answers. Days turned into weeks, and life slowly returned to normal. Yet every time I left or entered my house, those scratches on my door served as a chilling reminder of Halloween's eerie visitor. The mask, the cloak, the deliberate scratches, they're all pieces of an unsolved puzzle that still sends shivers down my spine. Halloween might be a night of make-believe horrors, but for me, the memory of that night is all too real. Every Halloween, my family would venture to my grandparents' farmhouse to celebrate. This centuries-old house, with its creaking wooden floors and echoing hallways, was the perfect backdrop for ghost stories. As a child, I loved those tales, even if they kept me up at night. But as I grew older, I began to dismiss them as mere figments of our collective imagination. That is, until the Halloween of 2015. That year was particularly hectic for me, with work and personal commitments taking their toll. By the time Halloween rolled around, I was in dire need of a quiet night at home. My parents and siblings were at the farmhouse, but I opted to stay behind. The evening began uneventfully. I'd made popcorn, settled in for a horror movie marathon, and enjoyed the infrequent ring of the doorbell as trick-or-treaters came and went. But by midnight, the world outside had quieted down. It was just me, the flicker of the TV, and the occasional rustle of wind outside. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of the back door knob turning. My heart raced, but I tried to calm myself. It's probably just the wind, I thought. But then I heard it again, more insistent this time, followed by a soft thud, as though someone was trying to shoulder the door open. Switching off the TV, I tiptoed to the kitchen, grabbing the heaviest object I could find, a cast iron skillet. The back door had a small window, and peering through, I could make out a silhouette. Someone was definitely there, fiddling with the lock. Dialing 911, I whispered my situation to the operator. They told me to stay quiet and find a safe place to hide while they dispatched an officer. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and wedged a chair under the handle. The minutes stretched infinitely as I waited, but then the sounds grew louder. The person had given up on the back door and was now trying the windows, methodically moving around the house. I could hear the faint sounds of frustration, a muttering voice that sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly the noises stopped. The silence was even more terrifying. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the slow, deliberate creak of floorboards from the living room. The intruder was inside. I thought back to those ghost stories at my grandparents' farmhouse, realizing that the palpable fear I felt now was far more intense than any tale from my childhood. As the footsteps approached, I held my breath, praying they'd move past my bedroom. For a moment they did, but then they returned, stopping right outside my door. I gripped the skillet tighter, my entire body trembling. I could see the shadow of feet under the door and heard a soft, curious humming. The intruder tried the handle, rattling it slightly. My heart was pounding so loudly I was certain they could hear it. Then, to my horror, a thin tool slid under the door, trying to dislodge the chair I'd wedged against it. The intruder was crafty, experienced. As the chair shifted slightly, I knew I had to act. Summoning every ounce of courage, I kicked the door as hard as I could. A surprised grunt echoed from the other side, and the tool retracted. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing steadily louder. The intruder seemed to recognize this too, as their presence receded rapidly. By the time the police arrived, the house was empty except for me. To this day, I have no idea who tried to enter my home or what their intentions were. The police speculated it could have been a burglar or maybe someone looking for shelter. But the deliberate manner in which they tried to access my room suggests a more sinister motive. Each Halloween since, I've returned to my grandparents' farmhouse, seeking comfort in family and familiar surroundings. The city house, once a place of solace, now harbors too many haunting memories. And while the tales of old still bring a shiver to my spine, it's the real-life terror of that Halloween night that forever changed how I perceive the boundaries between fiction and reality. Every Halloween, I eagerly anticipate the season's mix of mirth and macabre, the innocent alongside the eerie. However, one Halloween stands out, not for its festivity, but for its chilling encounter. I had just moved into a small, cozy apartment that overlooked a busy street, perfect for people watching. On this particular Halloween night, I was hosting a small gathering. Friends, dressed in an assortment of playful costumes, laughed and shared stories as the night wore on. As the evening dwindled and my friends left one by one, I cleaned up and then sat by my window with a mug of hot cocoa, watching trick-or-treaters roam the streets. Their joyful shrieks and laughter were infectious. As it got later, the crowd outside began to thin. replaced by older teens and adults dressed in more grotesque or elaborate costumes. That's when I noticed him, a man standing on the opposite sidewalk, wearing a long trench coat and an unnervingly lifelike mask. The mask depicted a man's face, twisted in an expression of sorrow and anguish. What struck me wasn't just the eeriness of the mask, but the fact that he was standing perfectly still amidst the crowd staring directly at my apartment. I felt a chill creep up my spine. The world seemed to blur as his gaze held mine. I blinked, hoping he'd move on, but he didn't. Attempting to shake off my unease, I moved away from the window and tried to immerse myself in a book. However, every so often I'd peek out. He was always there, unwavering. Hours seemed to have passed and the street grew deserted. Still, he stood. With a jolt, I remembered that I had forgotten to lock my balcony door after airing out the apartment earlier. I cautiously approached the balcony, ensuring I wasn't visible from the street, and silently slid the door shut, turning the lock. As I withdrew from the balcony, my curiosity got the better of me, and I peeked through the blinds. The man was no longer on the opposite sidewalk. My heart raced. I scoured the street, but he was nowhere to be found. Feeling a mixture of relief and unease, I decided to call it a night. I double-checked all the locks and retreated to my bedroom. As I settled into bed, I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like someone dragging something sharp across a surface. The sound seemed to come from the living room. Frozen with fear, I strained my ears, trying to place the sound. After what seemed like an eternity, the scraping stopped, replaced by the softest tapping on the balcony door. I needed to act. Grabbing my phone, I texted a close friend who lived nearby, quickly explaining the situation. She replied almost instantly, urging me to call the police and saying she was on her way over. I dialed 911 and whispered my situation. The dispatcher advised me to stay quiet, lock my bedroom door, and wait for the police. As minutes ticked by, the tapping grew more persistent, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone trying the balcony door handle. Suddenly, the noises ceased, replaced by silence. The stillness was even more terrifying. After a tense wait, I heard the distant wail of sirens, growing steadily louder. The next sound was a pounding on my apartment door, followed by a shout. "Police, open up!" I've never felt such relief in my life. I opened the door to two officers who quickly checked the apartment. There was no sign of forced entry, but on the balcony, they found two chilling things: scratch marks near the door handle and a mask, the very mask the man had been wearing, placed neatly on the ground. Despite their best efforts, the police couldn't find the man. My friend arrived soon after, and I spent the night at her place. The following day, I installed multiple security cameras. Months have gone by, but the mystery remains. Who was he? What did he want? Every so often, I find little reminders that he's still out there. A white feather, like the one he wore on his coat, placed on my doorstep, a fleeting shadow at the corner of my vision. This year, as Halloween approaches, I'm left with an unsettling thought. Will he return? And if he does, what will he want?